It was nearly midnight when Olivia Bennet finally packed up her textbooks. The law library was almost empty, just a few other stressed-out students still hunched over their notes. Her eyes burned from reading case studies for hours. All she wanted now was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. The campus parking lot was quiet and dark. Olivia pulled her jacket tighter as she walked to her old blue Honda. The car had been her high school graduation gift from her dad, nothing fancy, but reliable. She tossed her heavy backpack onto the passenger seat and started the engine. The roads were mostly empty this late. Olivia turned up the radio, humming along to keep herself alert for the 20-minute drive home. She was thinking about tomorrow's mock trial when flashing lights suddenly appeared in her rearview mirror. Olivia's heart jumped. She checked her speed. She wasn't going fast. Confused but calm, she signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. She'd been taught by her father exactly what to do during traffic stops. Stay calm, be polite, keep your hands visible. The police officer approached slowly, flashlight beam bouncing with each step. Olivia rolled down her window and smiled politely. License and registration, the officer demanded before she could speak. His nameplate read Reeves. He didn't smile back. Of course, officer, Olivia said, reaching slowly for her purse. May I ask why you pulled me over? Officer Reeves ignored her question. Where are you coming from this late? The university library. I'm a law student. I was studying for. A convenience store was robbed 20 minutes ago. He cut her off. Blue Honda, just like yours, was seen leaving the scene. Olivia blinked in surprise. Sir, I've been at the library all evening. I have my student ID and. Step out of the vehicle, Officer Reeves ordered, his hand moving to rest on his holster. Olivia felt a chill run through her. Officer, there must be some mistake. I can prove where I've been. The library has security cameras and. I said, step out of the vehicle. Now. Something in his tone made Olivia's stomach knot. She carefully opened her door and stepped out, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Officer Reeves, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There must be many blue Hondas in the city. I was studying all night. I can call my study group to confirm. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle, he snapped. Sir, please just look at my ID. My name is Olivia Bennet. I'm a law student. I wasn't anywhere near a convenience store tonight. Officer Reeves' face hardened. Are you refusing to comply? No, sir, I'm just trying to explain. Before she could finish, Officer Reeves grabbed her arm and roughly turned her around, pushing her against the car. The cold metal of handcuffs closed around her wrists with a terrifying click. You're under arrest for suspected armed robbery, he stated flatly. What? This is crazy. I didn't rob anything. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. Please just check my ID. Call the university. I was there all night. Officer Reeves ignored her pleas as he recited her rights. Olivia's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. She knew her rights. She knew this was wrong. But knowledge didn't seem to matter as she was led to the patrol car and placed in the back seat. Through the partition, she heard Officer Reeves' radio in. I've apprehended a suspect matching the description from the convenience store robbery. Bringing her in now. Officer, please. Olivia tried once more, her voice shaking. I get to make a phone call, right? My father works for the FBI. He can clear this up. Officer Reeves glanced back at her with a smirk. Short, sweetheart. Your dad's FBI and I'm CIA. Save the stories for the station. As the patrol car pulled away, Olivia watched her Honda, with all her school materials and ID inside, fade into the distance. She felt sick with fear and anger. What was supposed to be a normal study night had turned into a nightmare. She leaned her head against the cold window and closed her eyes, trying to stay calm. One thought kept her from panicking completely. Her father would fix this. When Robert Bennett found out what happened to his daughter, Officer Reeves would learn exactly what it meant to mess with the wrong girl. Robert Bennett was going through case files in his home office when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the clock, almost 1 a.m. A call this late was never good news. When he saw it was from the county jail, his heart skipped a beat. He answered quickly, expecting to hear Olivia's voice. Instead, it was an automated message. You have a collect call from, followed by his daughter's shaky voice saying her name. The robotic voice asked if he would accept the charges. Robert pressed one so hard he nearly cracked his screen. "Dad?" Olivia's voice was small and frightened. "Livy, what's wrong? Where are you?" Robert was already on his feet, grabbing his car keys. "I'm at the police station downtown. Dad, they arrested me. They think I robbed a store, but I was at the library all night. The officer wouldn't even look at my ID. He just handcuffed me and—" Her voice broke. "Listen to me carefully," Robert said, forcing himself to sound calm while his blood boiled. "Don't say anything else to anyone. Just tell them you want a lawyer. I'm on my way right now. They took my bag with everything in it. My student ID, my notes. It's all still in my car." They wouldn't listen to me. "It's going to be okay," Robert promised. "Which officer arrested you? Do you remember his name?" "Reeves. Officer Reeves. Dad, he was so mean. He acted like I was lying about everything." Robert grabbed a notepad and wrote down the name. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Hang tight, kiddo." After hanging up, Robert made 2 calls. The first was to Thomas Wilson, his colleague in the FBI who had connections in every police department in the state. The second was to Lisa Chen, a lawyer friend who specialized in police misconduct cases. "Tom, I need a favor," Robert said when his friend answered. "My daughter's been wrongfully arrested by an Officer Reeves at the downtown precinct. I need everything you've got on him. Give me 10 minutes. Thomas replied, fully awake now. "I'll meet you there." Robert's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white as he drove. 25 years working for the FBI had taught him to control his emotions, but this was different. This was his little girl. He pictured Olivia sitting alone in a cell, scared and confused. The thought made his jaw clench. But getting angry wouldn't help her. He needed to be strategic. By the time Robert pulled into the police station parking lot, Thomas had texted him a file on Officer James Reeves. 6 complaints of excessive force in the past 2 years. 2 accusations of racial profiling. No disciplinary actions taken. Robert tucked his phone away and straightened his tie. He knew how this game was played. He'd walk in there not as an angry father, but as FBI Special Agent Bennett. The front desk officer looked up as Robert approached. "Can I help you?" "Special Agent Robert Bennett, FBI." He flashed his badge. "I'm here about Olivia Bennett, who was brought in tonight." The officer's expression changed slightly. "One moment, sir." While waiting, Robert noticed a familiar face coming through the door. Sergeant Maria Lopez, who had worked with him on a joint task force last year. "Robert?" Her surprise was evident. "What are you doing here?" "My daughter was arrested tonight. Mistaken identity. Officer Reeves brought her in." Maria's expression darkened. "Reeves, I see." She lowered her voice. "Come with me." She led him through the security door without signing him in. "Reeves has been a problem for a while," she admitted quietly as they walked. "But the union protects him, and the chief doesn't want the headache." They turned a corner, and Robert saw Officer Reeves at a desk, filling out paperwork. The man looked up, annoyed at the interruption, then noticed Robert's expression. "Officer Reeves," Maria said crisply, "this is Special Agent Bennett from the FBI. He's here about the young woman you arrested tonight." Reeves stood slowly. "The robbery suspect." "My daughter," Robert corrected, his voice dangerously quiet. "The law student who was at the university library all night, which the campus security footage will confirm." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Reeves' face. "I want to see her, now." Robert's tone left no room for argument. "And then you and I are going to have a conversation about proper police procedure and what happens to officers who abuse their authority." Reeves looked to Maria for support, but found none. She was already walking toward the holding cells, gesturing for Robert to follow. "Your daughter's ID checked out," she said softly. "We were about to process her release." "That's not good enough," Robert replied. "Not even close." As they reached the cell area, he took a deep breath. First, he would make sure Olivia was okay. Then Officer Reeves would learn exactly what happens when you pick on the wrong family. The holding cell was cold and smelled of bleach. Olivia sat on the metal bench, arms wrapped around herself. When she heard footsteps approaching, she looked up. The sight of her father made her jump to her feet. "Dad." she called out, rushing to the bars. Sergeant Lopez unlocked the cell door. "You're free to go, Miss Bennett. We apologize for the misunderstanding." Robert wrapped his arms around his daughter, holding her tight. He could feel her trembling slightly. "Aren't you okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her red-rimmed eyes told a different story. "Can we just go home?" "Soon," Robert promised, keeping an arm around her shoulders as they walked out of the cell area. "We need to handle a few things first." In the main office, Officer Reeves stood with his arms crossed, watching them approach. Next to him was a balding man in a rumpled suit, Lieutenant Parker, according to his nameplate. "Miss Bennett," the lieutenant began, "on behalf of the department, I want to apologize for this unfortunate situation. We've confirmed you were at the university library during the time of the robbery. You're free to go, and of course, all charges have been dropped." "That's it?" Robert asked, his voice level but cold. "An unfortunate situation. My daughter was handcuffed and arrested without cause, denied her rights, and you call it unfortunate." Lieutenant Parker shifted uncomfortably. Officer Reeves was following procedure based on the vehicle description. "The vehicle description was a blue Honda," Robert cut in. "Do you know how many blue Hondas there are in this city?" "Thousands. That's not probable cause, and you know it." He pulled out his phone. "But let's talk about what really happened. I've reviewed the arrest report Officer Reeves filed. He claimed my daughter matched the physical description of the robbery suspect." Robert turned the phone toward them, showing a still image from the convenience store security camera. "The actual suspect is a male with a beard, approximately 6 feet tall. My daughter is 5'4". Officer Reeves didn't make a mistake. He lied on an official police report. Officer Reeves' face flushed. "Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait," Robert said, his voice sharp as a knife. "I spent 20 minutes in your captain's office reviewing your body cam footage. You never asked for her ID. You never verified her alibi. You decided she was guilty the moment you pulled her over." Olivia watched her father with wide eyes. She'd never seen this side of him before, the professional FBI agent who could dismantle someone with just his words. "This is ridiculous," Reeves sputtered. "You can't just walk in here throwing accusations because your daughter." "Because my daughter what?" Robert took a step closer. "Because my daughter knows her rights? Because she didn't immediately bow to your authority? Or because you have a history of targeting young women and minorities? 6 complaints in 2 years, Officer Reeves. That's quite a record." The lieutenant looked alarmed. "How did you access that information?" "I'm FBI," Robert said simply. "And I'm just getting started." Sergeant Lopez stepped forward. "Lieutenant, I've pulled the bodycam footage as requested. It's ready for review in the conference room." Lieutenant Parker looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "Agent Bennett, perhaps we could discuss this privately." "No," Robert said firmly. "There's nothing to discuss in private. I want Officer Reeves' badge and gun on this desk right now. He's being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation by Internal Affairs." "You can't do that," Reeves protested. "You don't have the authority." "Actually, he doesn't need to," came a new voice. A tall man in a suit walked in, holding up his ID. "Thomas Wilson, FBI. I've just spoken with your captain. Given the circumstances and the evidence of falsified reports, he agrees that immediate suspension is appropriate." The look on Reeves' face shifted from anger to shock. He turned to Lieutenant Parker, who nodded grimly. "Your weapon and badge, Reeves. Now." With shaking hands, Officer Reeves unclipped his badge and unholstered his gun, placing them on the desk. "This isn't over," he muttered as he walked past Robert. "You're right about that," Robert replied calmly. "It's just beginning. Olivia, let's go get your car and belongings." As they walked out of the station, Olivia squeezed her father's hand. "How did you do all that so quickly?" Robert smiled for the first time that night. "I made some calls while driving over. But trust me, we're just getting started. What happened to you tonight? It's happened to others who didn't have an FBI agent for a father. And that stops now." Thomas joined them in the parking lot. "The captain wants to meet tomorrow morning. He's not happy about this publicity nightmare." "Good," Robert nodded, "because I'm just warming up." The next morning, Robert sat at his kitchen table surrounded by files and his laptop. He hadn't slept much. After bringing Olivia home and making sure she was okay, he'd spent hours making calls and pulling records. Olivia came downstairs in her pajamas, hair messy from sleep. "Dad, have you been up all night?" Robert looked up and managed a tired smile. "Just doing some homework." He pushed a mug toward her. "Coffee's fresh." She poured herself a cup and peered at his papers. "What is all this?" "Every complaint filed against Officer Reeves in the last 5 years." Robert tapped a thick folder. "And these are the complaints that were dismissed without investigation." Olivia's eyes widened as she flipped through the stack. "There are so many. How did he keep his job?" "That's what we're going to find out." Robert turned his laptop so she could see the screen. "I've been mapping the locations of all his arrests and traffic stops. Notice anything?" Olivia studied the map with its dozens of red pins clustered in certain neighborhoods. "They're mostly in areas with lots of college students and minority communities." "Exactly. Classic profiling pattern." Robert rubbed his eyes. "But there's more. I called some of the people who filed complaints. Many had similar experiences to yours. Stopped for flimsy reasons, treated aggressively, denied their rights." The doorbell rang. Robert checked his watch. "That'll be Thomas." Thomas Wilson entered carrying a cardboard box and a tray of coffees. "Morning, Bennetts. I brought reinforcements." He set the box on the table. "Bodycam footage from 20 of Reeves' arrests in the past year. Took some doing to get these." Olivia looked surprised. "Is that legal?" Thomas grinned. "When the FBI is investigating potential civil rights violations." "Absolutely." For the next few hours, the three of them reviewed footage, took notes, and built a timeline. The pattern became clearer with each video. Officer Reeves consistently escalated routine stops, particularly with certain types of people. "Look at this one," Olivia said, pointing to her screen. "He pulled this guy over for a broken taillight, but there's clearly nothing wrong with the light when he walks around the car." Robert made a note. "Add it to the list. That's the 5th false pretext we found." The phone rang, and Robert answered. After a brief conversation, he hung up with a satisfied expression. "That was Lisa Chen, the lawyer I contacted. She's agreed to represent 3 of Reeves' previous victims in a civil suit against the department, and she's bringing in a civil rights attorney from the Justice Department." Thomas whistled. "You're not messing around." "This isn't just about what happened to me anymore, is it?" Olivia asked quietly. Robert shook his head. "It never was, honey. What happened to you was terrible, but you're lucky. You have me. Most people don't have an FBI agent for a parent. They get steamrolled by the system." The afternoon brought another visitor, Sergeant Lopez from the night before. She looked nervous standing in their living room. "I probably shouldn't be here," she admitted, "but after seeing those records you pulled up last night, I couldn't stop thinking about it." She handed Robert a USB drive. "Internal department evaluations of Officer Reeves. 3 supervisors recommended psychological evaluation. All 3 recommendations were ignored." Robert took the drive. "This is a big risk for you." Lopez shrugged. "I became a cop to protect people, not to cover for bullies with badges." She looked at Olivia. "I'm sorry about what happened to you." After she left, Thomas plugged in the drive. "This is gold," he said as he skimmed the files. Records showing the department knew he was a problem and did nothing. Robert's phone buzzed with a text. "Captain's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Wants to resolve this matter quietly." Olivia frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they're getting nervous." Robert closed his laptop. "They'll probably offer a settlement, maybe a written apology if we drop the whole thing." "And will we?" Olivia asked. Robert looked at the wall of evidence they'd compiled, dozens of cases of abuse, negligence, and cover-ups. He thought about all the people who didn't have the resources to fight back. "Not a chance," he said firmly. "We're just getting started." Thomas raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "I almost feel sorry for them. They have no idea what's coming." The police station conference room felt tense. Robert sat beside Lisa Chen, the civil rights attorney, with Thomas standing behind them. Across the table, Police Chief Gregory Porter looked like he hadn't slept in days. Next to him sat the department's lawyer and Captain Daniels, who kept checking his watch nervously. "Let's cut to the chase," Chief Porter began. "We're prepared to offer a formal apology to your daughter." Officer Reeves has been suspended without pay pending a full review. We're also willing to discuss reasonable compensation for the distress caused. Lisa opened a folder. That's an inadequate response to a serious pattern of misconduct, she said calmly. We've documented 27 cases in the past 18 months where Officer Reeves violated citizens' rights. In 18 of those cases, complaints were filed and ignored. The department lawyer leaned forward. We're here to discuss one incident with Miss Bennett, not to put the entire department on trial. That's where you're wrong, Robert replied. He pushed a thumb drive across the table. This contains evidence that Reeves' behavior was reported to 3 different supervisors. Each time, the complaints were buried. This isn't about one bad cop anymore. It's about a system that protected him. The chief's face darkened. Agent Bennett, I understand you're upset about your daughter, but this crusade feels personal. Using your FBI position to what? Robert challenged. To ensure justice? To hold people accountable? That's literally my job. The door opened suddenly, and a man in an expensive suit walked in. Sorry I'm late. He nodded to the police officials. Frank Reynolds, police union representative. I've advised Officer Reeves not to participate in this witch hunt. Lisa smiled thinly. That's his right, but it won't stop the Justice Department investigation that begins tomorrow morning. Justice Department? Captain Daniels looked alarmed. Thomas placed a formal letter on the table. The Civil Rights Division is opening an investigation into pattern and practice violations within this department, starting with Officer Reeves' cases but potentially expanding. The room erupted in angry voices. Frank Reynolds pounded his fist on the table. This is outrageous. One disputed arrest doesn't justify federal intervention. It wasn't just one, came a voice from the doorway. Sergeant Lopez stood there with a young woman Robert didn't recognize. This is Joanna Tucker. Officer Reeves arrested her last year using the same tactics he used on Olivia Bennett. The charges were dropped, but she lost her job because of the arrest. Joanna stepped forward nervously. After I saw the news about your daughter, I knew I had to come forward. I was too scared before. Chief Porter glared at Sergeant Lopez. You had no authority to bring a civilian into this meeting. No, but I had a conscience, Lopez replied. And I'm not the only one. She placed a folder on the table. 7 officers have come forward with statements about misconduct they witnessed, but were pressured to ignore. The union rep jumped up. This meeting is over. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. Actually, Lisa said, pointing to her phone that had been recording the whole time, we're just getting started. By this time tomorrow, local news will have copies of all our evidence. The public deserves to know what's happening in their police department. Robert watched as the chief's face went from angry to defeated in seconds. The man suddenly looked 10 years older. What do you want? He asked quietly. Real change, Robert answered. Independent review of all complaints. Bodycams that can't be turned off. Transparent discipline procedures. And yes, justice for every person Reeves mistreated, including my daughter. The department lawyer whispered something to the chief, who nodded slowly. We'll need time to consider these demands. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Lisa said, standing up. After that, we go public and let the Justice Department take over. As they walked out of the station, Thomas nudged Robert. They're panicking. Did you see their faces when Lopez brought in that witness? Robert nodded. They thought they could buy us off with an apology and some cash. Back at home, Olivia was waiting anxiously. How did it go? They tried to make it all go away quietly, Robert explained as he loosened his tie. But we showed them we're not backing down. Olivia hugged him tightly. I was scared at first, but now I'm just angry. All those people Reeves hurt who couldn't fight back like we can. Robert's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You made enemies today. Back off while you still can. He showed it to Thomas, who frowned. They're getting desperate. Good, Robert said, deleting the message. Desperate people make mistakes. And we'll be there to document every one of them. The Internal Affairs hearing room was packed. News of the case had spread, bringing reporters, community activists, and concerned citizens. Olivia sat in the front row, nervously smoothing her skirt. This would be the first time she'd see Officer Reeves since the night of her arrest. Robert adjusted his tie and reviewed his notes one last time. Lisa Chen sat beside him, arranging evidence files in precise order. "You ready for this?" Lisa asked quietly. Robert nodded. "More than ready." The side door opened, and Officer Reeves entered with his union lawyer. Reeves looked different now, less confident, with dark circles under his eyes. He glanced at Robert and quickly looked away. The three-person review panel took their seats at the front table. Deputy Commissioner Howard, a civilian oversight member named Mrs. Rodriguez, and Captain Wilson from a neighboring district. The room fell silent as Deputy Commissioner Howard called the hearing to order. This panel will review evidence regarding Officer James Reeves' conduct in the wrongful arrest of Olivia Bennett and examine related complaints of misconduct. He looked directly at Robert. "Agent Bennett, you may present your case." Robert stood and walked to the center of the room. For a moment, he thought about how much easier it would have been to just accept the department's quiet settlement offer. But then he looked at Olivia and at Joyner Tucker sitting beside her and remembered why they were fighting. This case began with one wrongful arrest, Robert started, his voice steady and clear. But it quickly revealed a pattern of abuse that went unchecked for years. He played the bodycam footage from Olivia's arrest, narrating the key points where proper procedure was ignored. The room was silent except for occasional murmurs as the video showed Olivia repeatedly trying to explain she was a student, with Reeves cutting her off each time. Officer Reeves stated in his report that my daughter matched the description of the robbery suspect. Robert continued, switching to a slide showing the actual surveillance photo next to Olivia's driver's license picture. As you can see, the actual suspect was a bearded man over 6 feet tall. My daughter is 5'4". Mrs. Rodriguez frowned. Why wasn't this discrepancy noted during booking? An excellent question, Robert replied. He played another video clip showing Reeves telling the booking officer that Olivia had been caught with evidence in her car, a complete fabrication. For the next hour, Robert methodically presented evidence from other cases where Reeves had falsified reports, escalated routine stops into arrests, and targeted specific groups of people. Thomas provided FBI analysis showing that Reeves' arrest patterns couldn't be explained by crime statistics. When it was Reeves' turn to respond, his lawyer did most of the talking, arguing that his client was being unfairly targeted because of one mistake with a connected family. "My client has served this community for 12 years, the lawyer insisted. "His record speaks for itself." "Yes, it does," Lisa Chen responded, standing to cross-examine. "Officer Reeves, can you explain why you turned off your bodycam for 8 minutes during the arrest of Miguel Hernandez last September?" Reeves shifted uncomfortably. "Technical malfunction." "Interesting," Lisa said, "because we have 5 similar malfunctions, all occurring at critical moments during controversial arrests." As the questioning continued, Reeves became increasingly defensive and contradicted his own previous statements. When Lisa showed documentation proving he had been trained specifically on proper identification procedures, the very ones he ignored with Olivia, his face flushed with anger. "You don't understand what it's like out there," he finally snapped. "Split-second decisions, everyone questioning your authority. Sometimes you have to make an example." He stopped abruptly, realizing what he'd admitted. The room erupted in whispers. His lawyer frantically whispered in his ear, but the damage was done. Deputy Commissioner Howard called for order. "This panel will deliberate and announce our decision tomorrow morning." He looked troubled as he gathered his papers. "I've heard enough for today." Outside the hearing room, reporters surrounded Robert and Olivia. One thrust a microphone forward. "Agent Bennett, what outcome are you hoping for?" Robert put his arm around his daughter. "Justice. Not just for Olivia, but for everyone who's been mistreated. The badge means protecting people, not intimidating them." As they walked to their car, Thomas joined them. "You did it," he said quietly. "After that performance, they have no choice but to take action." Olivia squeezed her father's hand. "Do you think this will really change anything?" Robert looked back at the government building. "It already has." 6 months later, Olivia stood at a podium in front of City Hall, adjusting the microphone. She wore a professional blue blazer, her hair pulled back neatly. Behind her stood her father, Thomas, Lisa Chen, and a group of people whose lives had been touched by the case. Some had been victims of Officer Reeves. Others were police officers who had supported the reforms. "Thank you all for coming today," Olivia began, her voice stronger and more confident than she ever would have imagined 6 months ago. "When I was wrongfully arrested that night, I was scared and angry. I thought it was just a terrible mistake that happened to me. I never imagined it would lead to all of this." She gestured to the large banner behind her that read Community Policing Accountability Act with today's date underneath. The new policies being implemented today aren't just about one bad officer. They're about creating a system where everyone is treated fairly and where those with power are held accountable. Camera flashes popped as reporters documented the moment. In the front row, Chief Porter sat looking both uncomfortable and determined. Beside him, the mayor nodded encouragingly at Olivia. After the hearing 6 months ago, everything had happened quickly. Officer Reeves had been fired, and criminal charges for falsifying police reports were filed against him. The FBI's civil rights investigation expanded, revealing problems far beyond just one officer. Rather than fight the inevitable, Chief Porter had surprised everyone by embracing change. "We need to rebuild trust," he had announced on local television. "And that starts with admitting where we've gone wrong." Olivia continued her speech. "The new reforms include mandatory body cameras that cannot be turned off during encounters with the public. All complaints will now be reviewed by a board that includes community members, not just police supervisors. And every officer will receive additional training on bias and proper procedures." She looked at her father proudly. "None of this would have happened if people hadn't fought for what's right. My dad taught me that having power means using it to help others who don't have the same advantages." After the ceremony, people gathered in small groups, talking excitedly about the changes. Sergeant Lopez, recently promoted to lieutenant, approached Robert. "Not bad for 6 months' work," she said with a smile. "The department feels different already. Officers know they'll be held accountable now." Robert nodded. "It's a good start. How's the new training program going?" "Better than expected. Even some of the old-timers are coming around. Turns out, most cops want to do the right thing. They just needed better leadership and clear expectations." Across the room, Olivia was talking to a group of law students. After her experience, she had changed her focus to civil rights law and started an internship with a police accountability nonprofit. Her classmates looked at her with admiration as she explained the details of the new Citizen Review Board. "You should be proud," Thomas said, joining Robert. "Not many people could turn a personal injustice into positive change for an entire community." Robert watched his daughter. She did the hard part, sharing her story publicly, facing that officer in court. That took real courage. Joanna Tucker approached them, smiling shyly. "I just wanted to say thank you again. After what Officer Reeves did to me, I was afraid to even leave my house for weeks. I never thought I'd see justice." "How are things going at the new job?" Robert asked. "Really good. The community center hired 3 more counselors based on my recommendations. We're helping kids understand their rights and how to safely interact with police." As the crowd began to thin, a young officer walked up to Robert and Olivia. "Miss Bennett, I just completed the new training program. Your case was part of our curriculum, what not to do and why proper procedure matters. I wanted you to know it's making a difference." Olivia smiled. "That means a lot, thank you." Later that evening, back at home, Robert and Olivia sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset. The past 6 months had been exhausting but fulfilling. "Do you think it'll last?" Olivia asked quietly. "All these changes." Robert put his arm around her shoulders. "Change is never easy, and there will always be resistance. But yes, I think we've started something important. The hardest part was getting people to admit there was a problem. And all because one cop picked the wrong girl to mess with," Olivia said with a small smile. "No," Robert corrected gently. "All because that girl was brave enough to fight back, not just for herself, but for everyone else too." They sat in comfortable silence as the day's last light faded, knowing they had turned an injustice into something that would help others for years to come.